Hello, my name is Father Tom Esselman, a priest of the Congregation of the Mission Western Province, located in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm happy to be with you for this series of Lenten reflections on the 5 virtues given to the Church and the Vincentians by St. Vincent de Paul, our founder. St. Vincent recommended to us 5 virtues to help us grow in holiness and in the mission of following Christ, the evangelizer of the poor. The 5 virtues are simplicity, humility, meekness, mortification, and zeal for souls. During each of these reflections, we will examine one of the virtues, both for how St. Vincent understood it and how we might understand and apply it today. I would like to begin this reflection with a scripture text, highlighting the love of God as the animating center of our lives. It is from Psalm 63, verses 2 to 9. This reading can serve as an opening prayer to center us as we begin this reflection on the virtue of simplicity. The psalmist writes, "O God, you are my God. For you I long. For you my body yearns. For you my soul thirsts. Like a land parched, lifeless, and without water. So I look to you in the sanctuary to see your power and glory. For your love is better than life. My lips offer you worship. I will bless you as long as I live. I will lift up my hands, calling on your name. My soul shall savor the rich banquet of praise. With joyful lips, my mouth shall honor you. When I think of you upon my bed, through the night watches, I will recall that you indeed are my help. And in the shadow of your wings, I shout for joy. My soul clings fast to you. Your right hand upholds me." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our reflection today is on the virtue of simplicity. We will examine how St. Vincent understood the virtue of simplicity and how we might, in our lives today, in our contemporary world, understand simplicity. And I will close then by offering some questions that we might ponder as we think about the grace of simplicity that God is offering to us today. So, how did St. Vincent understand the virtue of simplicity? Well, one way of understanding simplicity is to see it in relationship to the virtues of humility and meekness, 2 other virtues that St. Vincent recommended. St. Vincent saw a certain relationship between simplicity, humility, and meekness. In his words, the first of the virtues is simplicity, which concerns God. The second is humility, which concerns our submission to God. By it we become a holocaust to God, to whom we owe all honor, and in whose presence we must efface ourselves and act in such a way that he may take possession of us. And the third virtue is meekness, or gentleness, which is important in order that we might put up with our neighbor's failings. And so, in St. Vincent's mind, the first virtue, simplicity, concerns God. The second virtue, humility, concerns ourselves. And the third virtue, meekness, concerns our neighbor. Now, St. Vincent is eminently practical when he describes the meaning of simplicity. St. Vincent would say 3 things on this account. First, simplicity consists in doing everything for the love of God and having no other aim but His glory. Second, at its core, simplicity is that single-mindedness which focuses everything on God and our love of Him. And third, that simplicity is essential and to be sought after in life. It is in this context that St. Vincent spoke of simplicity as my gospel. So important was simplicity to St. Vincent in his life that he referred to it as my gospel. Now, simplicity speaks to both the interior and the exterior life of the Christian and the Vincentian, both the inner and the outer person. Regarding the interior life, there is in simplicity a kind of purity of heart that seeks God above all else. This is reflected in the reading from Psalm 63, which I prayed at the beginning of this reflection. The psalmist again writes, "O God, you are my God, for you I long. For you my body yearns. For you my soul thirsts. Like a land parched, lifeless, and without water, so I look to you in the sanctuary to see your power and glory." Now one could imagine that St. Vincent saw in Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, the virtue of simplicity, as we read in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. Mary abides in the Lord, first and foremost. We might hear an appreciation of the virtue of simplicity in the words of Jesus to Martha. We remember these familiar words. Jesus says, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the best part, and it will not be taken from her." Perhaps we could say that in the Gospel we read that Mary has taken on the virtue of simplicity. But according to St. Vincent, simplicity should also mark the exterior, the outer life of the Christian and the Vincentian. According to St. Vincent, the world of his day was awash in duplicity, he says. In their apostolic behavior, Vincentian missionaries, and I think all Christians, should bear what he calls the simplicity of a dove, speaking and acting honestly and without reservations. They should avoid any, in his word, double dealing or manipulation, as he says, our intention being focused solely on God. We should accordingly avoid any phoniness. He would apply those words to all Christians, I think. In preaching missions, for example, Vincentians should avoid any kind of speaking which is contrived or self-congratulatory or focused on me and my learning or cleverness. We should speak rather in a direct manner, suited to the needs of the people. We should be down to earth, he would say. And St. Vincent would urge that there always be a consistency between the words we speak and the way we act. People should see in us that what you see is what you get. St. Vincent writes to the Vincentians in the Common Rules, "Each of us then should take care to behave always in this spirit of simplicity, remembering that God likes to deal with the simple and that He conceals the secrets of the heart from the wise and the prudent of this world and reveals them to the little ones. And so, St. Vincent calls Christians and Vincentians to that single-mindedness and purity of heart that focuses on the love of God before all else, that is reflected in a genuine and honest way of speaking and acting, both in the work we do as in the way we live with others. That gives us a sense of what St. Vincent understood by the virtue of simplicity, so important in the Christian and the Vincentian way of living. Now, how might we understand and live out the virtue of simplicity today? This is a critical question, I think. Times change. Meanings change. We can't assume that what we hear in the gospel or in the wisdom of a great saint like St. Vincent is immediately accessible to people today. What does it mean to speak of the virtue of simplicity in our day and time? How might we understand it and live it out? Well, let me suggest the following ways of understanding and putting into practice the virtue of simplicity in our day and time. The first way we might understand simplicity is as single-mindedness in the spiritual life. For me, simplicity is better rendered by the word single-mindedness. That commitment to the truth and abiding in the truth which is at the heart of the spiritual life. Single-mindedness suggests the notion of focus or attentiveness to God at work in our lives. In our busy world, filled with distractions, both real and virtual, learning to become single-minded, focused, committed from the core of our beings on the love of God and of our neighbor is itself a grace from God. Being single-minded, completely dedicated to the presence and love of God is one way of speaking of the virtue of simplicity. A second way of understanding simplicity, I think, can be found in the traditional practice of living in imitation of Christ, or what we in the Christian tradition call living in imitatio Christi. Living in the imitation of Christ mirrors Jesus' own way of relating to God the Father. Jesus is perfect simplicity. He does only what the Father calls him to. He is single-minded in his response to the Father and the glory of the Father. And so at the Last Supper, in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, "Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own. The Father who dwells in me is doing his works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, or else believe because of the works themselves." This text is St. John chapter 14, verses 10 to 11. There is a perfect unity between Jesus and the Father. Jesus glorifies the Father by living in him and doing his will only. That way of living, that communion between Jesus and the Father, can be seen in the ancient Christian practice of striving to follow Jesus completely. We call this practice of living in the imitation of Christ, which is at the heart, I believe, of the virtue of simplicity. St. Paul captures the virtue of simplicity, this desire to live only in imitation of Christ, in a very eloquent way in the letter to the Galatians. In chapter 2, verses 19 to 20, Paul writes, "For through the law I died to the law, that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ. Yet I live no longer I, but Christ lives in me." Jesus' life and death becomes Paul's life and death in a very profound way. Jesus' mind, his heart, his feelings, and his basic attitudes become the only content of Paul's life and the sole reference point of his missionary life. This is Paul's intent. This is what he points out to us. The virtue of simplicity trains the mind and heart on this spirit of unity with Christ and this desire, which we see in Paul, to live solely in the imitation of Christ. Now we find this virtue of simplicity, after the example of St. Paul, beautifully expressed in one of our Vincentian brothers, the China missionary St. John Gabriel Perbor. Note the words of his famous prayer, "O my divine Savior, transform me into yourself. May my hands be the hands of Jesus. May my tongue be the tongue of Jesus. Grant that every faculty of my body may serve only to glorify you. Above all, transform my soul and all its powers, so that my memory, my will, and my affections may be the memory, the will, and the affections of Jesus. I pray you to destroy in me all that is not of you. Grant that I may live but in you, and for you, and by you, and that I may truly say with St. Paul, I live now, not I, but Christ lives in me." Simplicity as a virtue draws us into communion with God, and in particular, communion with Jesus Christ, so that in every way possible, He lives in us and we live in Him. A third way of understanding simplicity is that of living out a consistency between our words and our actions. Simplicity challenges us to be truthful in our words, avoiding any duplicity, double-dealing, or manipulation, as St. Vincent would say. But it also calls us to fidelity, to be a person of our word, faithful over the course of our lives. This is speaking the truth with consistency, whether convenient or inconvenient. It is also living the truth with fidelity in good times and bad. And so the rich young man in the Gospel of Matthew was not a bad person, quite the opposite. The man we find in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, verses 16 to 30, was a man who kept the law. But he had a divided heart. Whatever religious commitments he had made were compromised by his need to manage his possessions. We are called to be people of our word in the life of vows, orders, and the commitments we have made to the common life and the apostolate. We are called to be people of our word in marriage and in the other important commitments we make. To remain faithful, Christians and Vincentians need the clarity and resolve that the virtue of simplicity gives. Consider how easily our commitments become compromised when our hearts become divided by different agendas. Simplicity is needed if we are to be faithful to our commitment to the gospel as the pearl of great price. A fourth way of understanding simplicity is as transparency. The notion of transparency suggests a way of life that is authentic. It is another way of speaking about the virtue of simplicity. A transparent person can be seen through. He or she is someone about whom one can say, what you see is what you get. In the transparent person, there is no difference between what he or she says and what they do. No hidden agendas, no double meanings, no two ways of being. This virtue is greatly valued in contemporary society, especially among the youth, and in a culture which is built around images and forms of images that are devised and manipulated. Transparency or simplicity is a very practical virtue. Without simplicity or transparency, no one will believe the words you preach or the ministry you carry out. If there is a lack of simplicity, a difference between one's words and deeds and one's heart, then the work of charity will fail. A fifth way of learning simplicity is speaking directly to others and to God. Simplicity would teach us the value of speaking directly and simply to other people. It would challenge us to understand our motivations and avoid triangulation in times of conflict. It is an essential virtue in the work of offering fraternal correction, for example. Simplicity is necessary in seeking out the wisdom of others in spiritual direction, for example. It is imperative that in order to grow in the Lord's life and grow in the ways of the kingdom, we avoid deception and falsehoods and enter into true reflection on our lives. The quality of spiritual direction will depend on the simplicity with which we disclose ourselves to a trusted spiritual companion. And so, to conclude this section, in our contemporary world, simplicity, so treasured by St. Vincent, might be best understood as single-mindedness in the spiritual life, as striving to be consistent in our words and actions, in living in a transparent way, in speaking directly to God and to others, and striving to live in imitation of Jesus Christ. And so, to conclude, during Lent, I would invite us to reflect on how the virtue of simplicity can help us renew and more fully live out our baptismal and Vincentian vocation. I would like to ask myself 3 questions today to address the virtue of simplicity. For example, how is the virtue of simplicity seen in my words and actions? In the commitments I've made in baptism, in vows, in marriage, in ordination, and other ways and times in which I have made myself significant commitments to other. Am I a person of my word? Or, secondly, how does the prayer of St. John Gabriel Parabor inspire me to live the virtue of simplicity? Or thirdly, how do the practices of spiritual direction, the sacrament of reconciliation, and sharing in family and friendship invite me into a deeper living out of the virtue of simplicity? My friends, may God bless you during this season of Lent. Let us remember to pray for one another and the poor. I look forward to our next reflection on the virtue of humility. St. Vincent de Paul, pray for us.